The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a swarm of insects trapped in plastic. Megan O'Brien adjusted the drip with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed this task exactly 4,237 times. She kept count. Her hands moved steady as a surgical laser, fingers barely trembling as she checked the flow rate, the saline climbing through clear tubing toward the elderly patient's wrist. The room smelled of antiseptic and something underneath it, fear, maybe, or just the particular staleness that accumulated in hospital rooms where worried family members held their breath and prayed. Nurse O'Brien. The voice cut across the patient's room like a blade through silk. Dr. Richard Mercer stood in the doorway, his white coat still crisp despite the late afternoon hour, his presence making the air pressure change. Behind him, the patient's daughter and son-in-law exchanged uncomfortable glances. Perhaps if you spent less time daydreaming and more time following protocol, you wouldn't need constant supervision. Mercer's tone was conversational, almost gentle, which made it worse. His eyes never moved from his iPad, the one he used to dictate notes loud enough for the entire unit to hear. That for insertion took you 46 seconds. Seattle General Standard is 30. The tubing wasn't secure to the arm board when I passed your station this morning. Megan didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Her jaw tightened, just barely imperceptible unless you were looking for it. But her hands kept moving. She secured the tubing with fresh tape, smoothed it flat, checked the line once more. When she spoke, her voice came out level, professional, empty of anything that might give him satisfaction. Yes, doctor. I'm sure you'll do better next time. He wasn't sure of anything. That was the point. Mercer needed her careless. Needed her documented as incompetent. Needed a paper trail he could show to HR with that particular expression of regret, the one that suggested he was just doing his job, just following protocol, truly sorry to see someone struggle so badly in a position that clearly exceeded their capabilities. The patient's daughter fidgeted with her purse. The son-in-law stared at the floor. Megan finished securing the checked the monitor once more, and stepped back with the kind of quiet efficiency that made her invisible. She didn't hurry out of the room. Didn't slink. Didn't show anything at all. The break room was exactly where it always was, a corner of fluorescent brightness on the 3rd floor, smelling of stale coffee and the specific desperation of people on 12-hour shifts. Megan opened her thermos and unwrapped the sandwich she'd made at 4 in the morning, turkey, no mayo, 1 slice of cheese. Practical. Fuel. Nothing more. She sat down at the faded table, the one with the burn mark shaped like Florida that nobody had ever bothered to refinish. 3 nurses grabbed their lunches from the refrigerator, Sarah, Martinez, and Patel, and moved toward the doorway in a choreographed exodus so practiced it might have been scheduled. They didn't look at her. Didn't acknowledge that she'd entered the room. Sarah's shoe squeaked against the tile. Martinez cleared her throat. Patel opened the door to the stairwell without a word. The room went dead silent. Megan took a bite of her sandwich. She'd seen this formation before, had watched it arrange itself in different configurations over the past 8 months. The staff rotating away from her like planets avoiding collision. The nurses who used to grab lunch together now finding reasons to eat at their desks. The texts that used to include her name simply stopping. She wasn't unkind. Wasn't rude. Wasn't anything, really. Just quiet. Competent. The kind of person who caught their mistakes and didn't say anything about it. The kind of person who made you wonder if you were doing your job wrong by comparison. Mercer had orchestrated this beautifully. He'd suggested, never stated, just gently suggested, that Megan was the kind of employee who needed to follow orders more carefully. That she had a tendency to think she knew better. That the other nurses might want to be careful about endorsing her work ethic on their own licenses. A few comments in the right ears. A couple of performance reviews highlighting areas for improvement. A raised eyebrow during a team meeting when someone questioned his decision. Pack mentality. It worked every time. Megan chewed her sandwich and stared at the blank wall. Her mind was already 3 floors down in the medical records department, cross-referencing supply invoices against actual inventory. Mercer had received a shipment of surgical drains 2 weeks ago, 48 units, according to the receipt signed by his procurement assistant. Seattle General's inventory system showed the hospital had only received 12. The other 36 had disappeared into a supply company owned, tangentially and through 3 corporate shells, by someone who shared Mercer's medical school graduation photo and fraternity pin. She'd already photographed 432 pages of documentation. Stored copies in a hospital cloud account under a username that traced back to a patient discharge from 2019. The patient didn't exist. Neither, technically, did the nursing work she was doing here, and not in any official capacity that would hold up in a courtroom. But it was her job. The kind of job you couldn't resign from. The kind that came from people who showed up at your apartment in Arlington at 2:41 a.m. and used words like classified and national security and the 3 families who had died because someone was selling critical medical supplies to the wrong people for profit. Room 347 was 3 floors down. She avoided it on Mondays and Wednesdays. On alternating Thursdays. On any day when she felt the particular weight of recognition trying to settle on her shoulders. The medic's name was James Chen. 24 years old. Army. Enlisted 6 months before she left her last posting in Helmand Province. He'd been assigned to her combat surgical hospital, a bright kid with steady hands and the kind of focus that meant he'd probably end up somewhere important if he didn't get killed first. 6 months after she'd left the unit, transferred out for reasons that didn't appear anywhere in official records, Chen had been at a checkpoint outside Sanjin when an IED detonated beneath an armored Humvee. The blast took his right foot above the ankle and his left leg from the knee down. The medic who found him stabilized him through the shock. The medevac team got him to Bagram in 42 minutes. He'd lived. Nobody told her he'd been discharged to Seattle General. Nobody told her he'd applied for the nursing program. Nobody told her he'd taken a position here in the trauma department. She found out when she walked past his station and saw his face. He hadn't recognized her? 3 years. Combat fatigues traded for scrubs. Short dark hair now shoulder length. Different hospital, different country, different everything. But he'd looked up from his computer, and for one breath, just one, she'd felt the weight of his recognition trying to land on her shoulders anyway. So she'd started taking every other floor assignment. Pediatrics. Obstetrics. ICU. Anywhere but the trauma unit where Chen worked. The rotation seemed harmless enough, just a preference for variety, a nursing professional trying to expand her skill set. Nothing that would raise questions. Nothing that would make Mercer look closer at the quiet nurse in the corner. Mercer, who needed her gone before she noticed the supply invoices. Mercer, who was probably already building the first layers of her termination file. She finished her sandwich. The break room stayed empty around her, the fluorescent lights humming their mechanical song, waiting for someone braver than this place allowed to do something that mattered. She had no idea what was about to walk through those doors. The unit board was posted at 6:27 a.m. before the day's shift arrived. Megan saw her name from the hallway, bold letters, clinical typeface, no ambiguity. Repeated failures to meet Seattle General standards, the memo read. Below that, a bulleted list, medication administration delays. Incomplete charting. Failure to prioritize physician directives. Unsafe independent decision-making. Each point was dated, catalogued, weaponized. Dr. Mercer's signature sat at the bottom in blue ink, formal and damning. She didn't stop walking. Didn't pause. The other nurses clustered around the board like it was a lottery drawing, their eyes widening as they read, then sliding sideways toward her as she passed. The fluorescent lights above droned their endless mechanical hum. One of the younger nurses, Sarah, maybe, actually gasped. Megan's jaw tightened, but only in the way that people sometimes clench their teeth when biting into something bitter. She kept moving toward the patient wing, her badge clipped to her chest at perfect perpendicular angle, her stride exactly the same as it had been for the past 4 months. But that wasn't the worst part. Mercer was waiting in the hallway outside room 312, coffee cup in one hand, tablet in the other. He took a sip before looking at her, the casual timing of it designed to establish that he'd already forgotten about her, that she was an afterthought. O'Brien. Not a greeting. An address. Dr. Mercer. You've seen the board. I have. He stepped closer, and she could smell the cologne, expensive, the kind that cost more than her weekly paycheck. His voice dropped into that particular register doctors used when they wanted to sound concerned rather than cruel. This pattern needs to stop. You're a liability to your team. To the patients. He paused, letting the second option settle between them like a blade. Starting today, you shadow me. Every shift. Every procedure. Every decision you make gets vetted before you make it. This is your probation. 13 weeks. If I see one more incident like the ones on that board, Seattle General will have no choice but to separate you from the nursing staff. It wasn't a request. It was a command spoken in the language of institutional power, backed by paperwork and precedent and the kind of authority that made hospital lawyers nod approvingly. Mercer had built this trap carefully. The public humiliation first, the board where everyone could see it. Then the isolation, the shadowing, the removal of her professional autonomy. It was the bureaucratic version of suffocation. Megan met his eyes, her face completely blank. Neutral. The kind of expression that suggested she was already thinking about her next patient, that his words were background noise. Understood. Do you? His eyebrows lifted slightly, that small gesture of a man who'd expected, maybe even wanted, some kind of reaction. Defensiveness. Tears. Anger. Anything that would justify the escalation. Because looking at your personnel file, I'm not sure you understand consequences. I'm not sure you understand what it means to work in a hospital with standards. She didn't blink. Didn't shift her weight. Hand stayed steady at her sides. When do you need me? For a moment, something flickered across Mercer's face, frustration, maybe. The subtle anger of a predator who'd found its prey already still, already calm, offering nothing to react against. He turned away, dismissing her with the rotation of his shoulders. Morning rounds. 30 minutes. Trauma Bay 2. He paused at the corner, looking back. And O'Brien? Get that write-up memo. Frame it if you want. Might remind you what happens when nurses forget their place. The words hung in the hallway after he left, designed to burrow. Megan waited exactly 5 seconds, then continued toward the patient rooms, each step deliberate and even. She had worked through worse. She had moved through deserts where the sand was hot enough to blister skin through combat boots. She had watched a 7.62 round miss her jaw by the width of a breath. She had held her team sergeant's hand while the morphine wore off and the pain came back, and she had not looked away. A memo on a hospital board was nothing. A doctor's contempt was nothing. The isolation was nothing compared to the weight of command decisions that cost people their lives. She just needed to hold position long enough to finish the mission. Morning rounds at 7:22 a.m. were different now. The attending physician, Dr. Hayes, competent, politically careful, stood at the nurse station, and when Megan approached to present the first patient's vitals, something subtle shifted in the room. The residents who'd been friendly enough before, the ones who'd asked her opinion on lab values and listened to her assessments, suddenly became very interested in their tablets. Dr. Hayes didn't make eye contact. The second resident actually stepped sideways, creating distance, as if proximity to her might mark him too. Mercer materialized at her elbow, his presence like a pressure change in the room. He took the chart from her hands without asking, their fingers not quite touching. "Let's go," he said to the group, and they moved through the unit together, a cluster of white coats and credentials that formed a kind of walking wall. Megan followed 3 steps behind, where shadowing put her. Visible. Present. Completely irrelevant. In room 204, an elderly woman recovering from a cardiac catheterization procedure lay in the bed, her daughter sitting in the chair beside her. Mercer approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the performance of a man who'd been trained to comfort people. "Mrs. Chen, how are we feeling today?" "Better, doctor." "Much better." He spent 4 minutes with her, appropriate time, thorough examination, good bedside manner. By every measurable standard, it was competent care. But as he was leaving, his hand brushed Megan's shoulder, not aggressive, just a small pressure, just enough to force her to step back from the doorway. Their eyes didn't meet. It didn't need to be that obvious. The resident saw it. Mrs. Chen's daughter saw it. The message was clear: this person is not equal. This person needs supervision. This person made the mistake of attracting my attention. In room 206, a man with pneumonia sat up against the pillows, breathing easier than he had been 2 days ago. Mercer performed his examination, asked the standard questions, reviewed the imaging on the tablet. Then he turned to the room and said, "This patient's improvement is due to the 4 antibiotic regimen and the respiratory therapy consult. Communication between departments makes the difference." He looked directly at the residents. Not individual nurses, no matter how much they might want credit for basic charting. The resident smiled thinly. One of them, the youngest, maybe 26, actually laughed. A small sound, but it filled the room like smoke. Megan stood in the corner, her hands loosely at her sides, and watched the monitor above the bed. The patient's oxygen saturation was 94%. His heart rate was 76. His blood pressure was stable. She'd been the one to catch the deterioration 3 days ago, to recommend the sepsis protocol, to sit with him at 2 a.m. when the fever spiked and talk him through the fear. But none of that mattered now. None of that was part of the official record anymore. By room 213, she'd stopped trying to make eye contact with anyone. She pulled her scrubs tighter, kept her shoulders slightly forward, small, unobtrusive, the shape of someone making themselves easy to forget. It was a different kind of invisibility than the one she'd trained for. In special forces, you learn to disappear into terrain and darkness and the gaps between what people expected to see. Here, she had to disappear in plain sight, in a hospital full of fluorescent lights and monitors and people, where being invisible meant accepting humiliation on a public board and being reduced to a subordinate shadow on rounds that used to include her input. The burn of it was cold and exact, like swallowing ice water. After rounds ended at 8:51 a.m., Mercer dismissed her without looking back. "Same schedule tomorrow. Rounds at 7. Don't be late." He was already turning away, already engaged with the residents about a consultation case, already moving on to the next performance. Megan went to the break room to start her charting. She'd been doing this long enough to know the pattern. The 3 nurses who usually occupied the space during the 9 a.m. break, Maria, Keisha, and Jen, were sitting at the table with their coffee cups and breakfast sandwiches. The room smelled like burnt toast and somebody's perfume. She poured her own coffee, black, and sat down at the far end of the table with her laptop. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then all 3 of them stood up at once. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just casual, coordinated, the way a flock of birds knows to lift off without discussion. Maria grabbed her sandwich, Keisha her coffee cup, Jen her phone. They filed out without speaking, without looking back. Megan kept her eyes on her computer screen. The charting entries were standardized, repetitive, safe. She typed the vitals, the assessments, the interventions. Each note was meticulous, documented to within an inch of perfection. If Mercer wanted to build a case against her incompetence, he'd need something better than her actual work, because her actual work was immaculate. She typed the last note at 9:38 a.m. and sat alone in the break room with a coffee that had gone lukewarm, listening to the hospital breathe around her. Somewhere down the hallway, a monitor alarmed. Someone called a code. Voices moved past the break room door without stopping. She had been a captain. She had led soldiers through places where the cost of incompetence was permanent. She had made decisions that changed lives and sometimes ended them, and she had carried the weight of that with people who understood the weight. She had not flinched. She was not going to flinch now. The difference was that then, at least, she'd been fighting something she could see. The monitor above room 347 beeped its steady rhythm, oxygen saturation 96, heart rate 72, blood pressure holding at 118/64. Everything normal. Everything routine. The medic lay on the bed with fresh bandaging around his left shoulder, the dressing change nearly finished, and Megan's hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. She was checking the surgical site when his breathing changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a subtle shift in how the air moved through his lungs, a tightness that made the ventilator work harder than it should have needed to. She looked at the monitor. The numbers hadn't moved. Still 96. But something in her chest recognized what her eyes hadn't confirmed yet, the kind of recognition that comes from having watched men die in a dusty compound 8,000 miles from home, the kind of knowledge written into muscle memory by 2 tours through Helmand Province. The medic's fingers began to clench against the mattress. His eyes went wide. Megan pressed the call button once. A simple, calm motion. Then she looked at his chest and saw it, the left side moving less than the right. Not obvious. Not to a resident 2 days out of rotation. But catastrophic. Tension pneumothorax, she said quietly, already moving. The words came out flat, diagnostic, the kind of statement a field medic makes when there's no time for explanation. She was reaching for the crash cart before the resident even realized someone had answered the call. 2 residents appeared in the doorway. Neither moved. One of them, a tall man with sweat already beading on his forehead, looked at the monitor as if the numbers there might change if he stared hard enough. They wouldn't. The oxygen saturation was dropping now. 94, 92. The medic's skin was taking on that grey-white pallor, the color of someone whose blood wasn't moving fast enough to carry oxygen anywhere useful. "We need equipment," Megan said. 14-gauge angiocath needle. Chest tube for follow-up. "Get Dr. Mercer." "He's in surgery," the second resident said. Not moving. Not reaching for a phone. The medic's breath came in short gasps. The monitor showed his heart rate climbing, 88, now 94, now 102. Blood pressure dropping with each beat. The room was filling with the sound of his struggle, the ventilator's mechanical wheeze fighting against the collapsed lung that wouldn't let air go anywhere it needed to go. Megan opened the crash cart and found the needle. A 14 gauge, exactly what she needed, exactly where protocol said it should be. She had used these before. Not in a hospital. Not in a room with fluorescent lights and monitors and residents standing frozen in the doorway. She had used them in a Humvee somewhere between Sanjin and the Pakistani border, while rounds came through the canvas roof and the dust was so thick you couldn't see your hands in front of your face. She had used one on a Marine from Charlie Platoon whose lung had collapsed the same way this medic's was collapsing now, not from a car accident, but from shrapnel that came from an IED someone had buried in the road 3 kilometers outside of FOB Shank. The memory lasted 1 second. Maybe less. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line, she said, and her voice had changed. It didn't sound like the voice of a nurse apologizing for daydreaming. It sounded like someone who had already made the decision to save this man's life and was not interested in discussion. The residents heard it. One of them flinched. She swabbed the medic's chest with antiseptic, the smell of it sharp and chemical, and positioned the needle. The medic was looking at her now, really looking at her, and she could see his eyes trying to recognize something in her face that his oxygen-deprived brain couldn't quite hold on to. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping was immediate and unmistakable, a sound like a tire deflating, like pressure finding the only exit available to it, like relief in its purest physical form. The medic gasped. Not a gasp of pain. A gasp of survival. His lungs expanded, pulling in air that could actually move, and the color started returning to his face like someone slowly raising the brightness on a screen. The monitor began to climb. 88, 92, 96, the oxygen saturation climbing with each breath, his body remembering how to distribute oxygen again, his heart rate beginning its slow descent from panic. The medic's eyes locked onto Megan's and held there, and for exactly 1 second, not a second and a half, not a moment, but precisely 1 second, she saw recognition flicker across his face. His lips formed a word. Whispered. So quiet the monitors almost drowned it out. Reaper. Megan kept her hand steady. Kept her breathing even. Finished securing the needle, confirmed the airway was open, verified the lung was expanding. Professional. Precise. The woman standing there looked like a nurse who had just successfully managed a medical emergency. The woman felt like someone whose entire operation had just collapsed into a single word spoken by a man whose death she had just prevented, a man who had no idea he was supposed to be looking at a woman who had disappeared 18 months ago from a combat zone in Afghanistan. One of the residents was already calling for backup. The other was moving to help. The medic's eyes were starting to close from the exhaustion of nearly dying, his body shutting down systems that could rest while more critical ones took over. His lips moved again but no sound came, just that one word, already fading, already becoming something he might convince himself he had imagined through the fog of hypoxia and fear. Megan pulled back from the bed. The needle was secure. The lung was re-inflating. The oxygen saturation had stabilized at 98. His heart rate was down to 76. Everything was stable. Everything was controlled. Everything was exactly what it should be. Which meant nothing, because the moment a medic from Charlie Platoon had opened his eyes and whispered the call sign of someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore, everything in Seattle General had shifted in a direction no one could predict. She had saved his life. She had also just started a countdown to something that could not be stopped. Dr. Mercer arrives before the medical team finishes documenting vitals. His footsteps echoed down the corridor like a prosecutor approaching the bench, deliberate, weighted with authority. Behind him walks hospital security, their radios crackling, and behind them, an HR officer clutching a manila folder so thick it could be mistaken for casework. The medic's eyes are still open, still aware, tracking Megan as she steps back from the bed to give the resident room to work. Mercer's face has drained of its usual clinical detachment. In its place sits something colder. Something that has been waiting for exactly this moment. Captain O'Brien, he says, and the use of her first name hangs in the air like an accusation. A word. Outside. Now. It isn't a request. It was a command. Megan glances at the medic one final time. His hand is still reaching for her, fingers trembling with the effort, but she turns without acknowledgement and follows Mercer into the hallway. The security officers flank her like she's a prisoner being transferred between facilities. The HR officer trails behind, already leafing through the folder, pulling out page after page of documentation that Mercer has clearly been assembling for weeks. Memos about protocol violations. Incident reports she never filed. A pattern of insubordination that, on paper, looks absolutely damning. You performed a procedure outside your scope of practice, Mercer begins, his voice carrying the precision of a surgeon making an incision. You inserted a needle into a patient's thoracic cavity without physician authorization. You undermined my clinical authority in front of 2 residents. You made a judgment call that, while it happened to save this patient's life, constitutes grounds for immediate termination under Section 7.3 of the Seattle General Standards of Professional Conduct. Megan says nothing. Her hands are still steady. Her breathing hasn't changed. This is the thing Mercer has never understood about her. She doesn't defend. She doesn't explain. She doesn't beg. She simply stands there, and her refusal to react seems to infuriate him more than any argument could. You had no authority to touch that patient. No certification, no protocol approval, nothing but your ego and your assumption that you knew better than the attending physician. He pulls a document from the HR officer's folder. His hands are shaking slightly as he holds it. A 14-gauge needle decompression without so much as a glance in my direction. You think you're a doctor now, O'Brien? You think nursing school in Colorado Springs taught you emergency surgical technique? The medic. He recognized her. which means the entire operation, 18 months of careful positioning, of documenting Mercer's kickback scheme with the medical supply contractor, of building a case that was going to go to federal investigators, is now compromised. The one person inside this hospital who knows her real identity just woke up from a collapse, grabbed her wrist, and whispered the call sign she hasn't heard spoken aloud in 4 years. Megan keeps her expression flat. "Yes, doctor." That wasn't a question. Mercer's voice drops lower now, more dangerous. "You're done here. Security will escort you to your locker. You will collect only your personal belongings. Your badge is being confiscated effective immediately. Your access to Seattle General is terminated as of this moment. You are not to return to this facility under any circumstances. If you attempt to re-enter hospital grounds, you will be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" "Yes, doctor." He holds out his hand, waiting. Megan reaches for the lanyard around her neck, the one that has been her identity for 18 months, and unclips it. The badge is still warm from her body. She places it in his palm, and the small act of surrender feels like handing over a weapon. Because that's what her position here was, in a way. Intelligence. Access. Proximity to a corrupt system that was draining millions from the Veterans Administration through inflated billing and phantom equipment purchases. The HR officer won't look at her as they walk toward the lockers. This is a practiced exodus, Megan understands. The hospital has done this before. Someone gets fired, and the institutional machinery swallows the termination whole, papers it, files it, moves on. The officer's name tag reads Margaret Chen, and her jaw is tight in the way of someone who has been instructed to say nothing. The locker room is empty. Megan opens her locker to find exactly what she left this morning, a single change of clothes, a thermos she brought from home, and underneath, the thing she promised herself she would never let anyone find. A small cardboard box, no bigger than a paperback book, containing a folded flag. Not the American flag, though folded flags are everywhere in military life. This one is different. It's a unit flag. The 75th Ranger Regiment's battle standard, personalized by her team sergeant with a single patch sewn into the corner. His name. His dates. The flag from his memorial service in Kandahar. She hasn't looked at it in months. To look at it would be to remember things that compromise her ability to do her job. To think about Tommy Graves, Breaker, they called him, and what it meant to hold a folded piece of fabric that was all they could recover from the ambush. Megan places the contents of her locker into a cardboard box from under the sink. The thermos. The clothes. The cracked mug from the break room that someone gave her 2 years ago with "World's Okayest Nurse" printed on it in fading letters. A half-dead succulent from the front desk that no one claimed during the holiday cleanup. And finally, carefully, the flag. She folds the cardboard box closed and turns to face the empty lockers. Margaret Chen stands by the door, still avoiding eye contact. Security escorts her to the exit. The rain outside has turned into something heavier, sheets of water that assault the pavement like applause for a performance that nobody wanted to see. The cardboard box softens immediately, the corrugation absorbing moisture. Megan walks through the hospital parking garage and finds herself at a bus stop 3 blocks away, the one that smells like diesel and wet concrete. She sits on the bench, the rain soaking through her scrubs, and places the cardboard box on her lap. Inside the box, the flag is already beginning to warp from the humidity. The mug is exactly as cheap and cheerful as she remembers. The succulent looks how it has looked for 6 months, barely alive, clinging to existence through nothing but stubbornness. And underneath, the flag. The flag that contains everything she is not allowed to be right now. Everything she gave up when she volunteered for this assignment. The thing about undercover work is that nobody tells you about the part where you're sitting at a bus stop in the rain, realizing that the one person who could have confirmed everything, the medic in room 347, the soldier who trusted her enough to replace her in the field, who took the shrapnel that was meant for someone else, just compromised the entire investigation. Mercer's corruption is still happening. His relationship with the medical supply contractor is still generating kickbacks. His fraudulent billing scheme is still costing the VA somewhere in the neighborhood of $270,000 per quarter. And the person who was supposed to document it all, the federal investigator embedded inside the hospital in Scrubs, just got terminated for saving someone's life. She could throw the flag away. Right now, sitting in the rain with everything falling apart, she could open the cardboard box and let the water take it. The whole thing, the mission, the identity, the memory of Breaker and Sanjin Valley, and the thing that happened at the bridge near Sorobi that she's never spoken aloud. It could all just dissolve into the Colorado Springs storm system, and tomorrow she could get a real nursing job at a real hospital with her real name, and nobody would ever have to know that she spent 18 months letting Dr. Mercer dismantle her reputation in order to build a case against him. Her hands are shaking. Not from cold. Not from fear. From the particular kind of rage that comes from being this close to something and having it slip through your fingers at the exact moment you're supposed to catch it. She reaches for the flag. Runs her thumb across the corner where her team sergeant stitched his own name into the fabric, refusing to let the military bureaucracy turn him into an anonymous casualty. She opens the cardboard box wider, watching the rain collect in the corrugations, and for a moment, just a moment, she considers letting it all go. And then she hears it. Faint at first, then growing louder. The sound of rotors cutting through the Colorado Springs rain. Not a standard helicopter. Not a medical transport or a police bird. The distinctive thump-thump-thump of a military-grade transport aircraft, the kind that doesn't fly over civilian airspace without explicit authorization. The rain is coming down hard enough now that visibility is maybe 100 yards. But Megan can feel the vibration in her chest. Can feel the pressure change in the air as something massive begins to descend toward the hospital grounds behind her. She closes the cardboard box and holds it tighter. The rotor wash shook the windows of the terminal 3 blocks away. The sound waves were visible, rippling the rain, bending the light itself. And somewhere inside Seattle General, a medic opened his eyes and asked the nurses standing over him a single question that would change everything. Where is she? The nurse who saved me. Where is Captain O'Brien? 2 days later, Megan is folding a t-shirt that no longer feels like hers when her phone buzzes. The video link pops up in her messages, already racking up 17,000 shares. She taps it. The thumbnail shows her own face, blurred but unmistakable, standing in a doorway in Scrubs. The title reads, Nurse takes down 300-pound intruder in operating room. She hits play. The security footage is grainy but clear enough. A man in maintenance coveralls, 312 pounds of rage and grief, storms through the OR 3 double doors screaming about his brother. The cardiac monitor beeps in steady rhythm. Dr. Mercer stands frozen at the table, hands still sterile, his face draining of color. The maintenance worker shoves a scrub tech into an instrument tray, the clang of steel echoing through the speakers, and charges toward the operating table like a linebacker with nothing left to lose. Then Megan appears in the doorway behind him. For seconds. That's all the footage shows before the angle shifts. She closes the distance in 2 strides, her movement so economical it barely registers as motion. Her hips rotate. Her hands catch his momentum, not resistance, redirection, and his own weight becomes his opponent. The hip throw rotates him parallel to the ground. His back hits tile. The air leaves his lungs in a wheeze that the microphone catches perfectly. Megan controls him down, one knee across his spine, her hands pinning his shoulders while her voice comes through soft as a prayer. I know this hurts. I know you're angry. But this isn't how we honor him. The man goes rigid. Then, impossibly, he starts to cry. The footage cuts there. But the internet doesn't cut there. The comment section is already at 43,000. Nurses sharing it. Paramedics. Doctors. Combat veterans. One comment, reposted 500 times, that's a takedown that requires actual training. That's not YouTube self-defense. That's professional work. Megan sets the phone down on the edge of the unmade bed. The video plays again without her touching it, algorithm, engagement, the machine feeding itself. She watches her own hands work. Watches her own voice deliver mercy to a man who came for blood. Watches everything she's spent 3 months hiding evaporate like rain on hot asphalt. Her phone buzzes again. Then again. Then continuously, like a countdown timer nobody set. Messages flood in from numbers she hasn't seen in years. Burner phones. Encrypted apps. Old call signs lighting up like a board at a command center. One message, from a number with no name, package en route. ETA 26 minutes. Inside Seattle General, on the 3rd floor, the medic in room 347 is propped up on his elbows when a nurse wheels a monitor in to show him the viral video. His eyes widen. His hand grips the bed rail. He's silent for 7 seconds, long enough for the nurse to think maybe he's in pain, and then he whispers a single word so quiet it almost doesn't make it out, Reaper. The nurse doesn't understand. But the medic understands perfectly. Reaper. The call sign she earned in Helmand Province during Operation Enduring Freedom. Reaper. The name on the patch she'd sewn into the inside of her jacket and left behind when she went undercover. Reaper. The one person in the hospital who could blow her cover with a single word had already done it the moment the needle went into his chest. The medic closes his eyes. His lips form words without sound, welcome home. Seattle General's main lobby fills with the sound of boots on tile by 2:13 p.m. Crisp military dress. 2 dress uniforms in dark blue with gold buttons that catch the fluorescent light like flashpoints. The Marine Corps liaison moves through the lobby with a folder under one arm and authority in every step. Behind him, a 2-star general with silver eagles on his shoulders and the kind of weathered face that comes from 31 years in uniform. They find Dr. Mercer in the hospital administrator's office. His mid-sentence about unprecedented actions and scope of practice violations when the liaison produces credentials and places a sheet of paper on the desk. The citation for Valor. Mercer's voice stops. The color drains from his face like someone pulled a plug. The general reads it standing up, each word landing like a strike, for extraordinary heroism in the face of immediate and life-threatening danger, while serving with the Special Forces Detachment, Headquarters, United States Central Command, during Operation Enduring Freedom in Helmand Province. The general's eyes don't leave the document. Captain Megan O'Brien demonstrated exceptional courage and decisive action under circumstances that would paralyze ordinary personnel. Her quick thinking saved the lives of 7 wounded personnel and prevented catastrophic loss of life. Mercer opens his mouth. That stolen Valor. That nurse's. The general looks up. His eyes move from Mercer to Mercer's mouth and back again, and something in that gaze makes the doctor's words evaporate like they were never spoken. The general doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Doctor, I would strongly suggest you stop talking now. The silence that follows has weight. The administrator shifts in her chair. A nurse peeking through the window pulls back. The general turns to the liaison. Get her. Megan walks into the office at 2:24 p.m. in full dress uniform, blues with a dress cover, medals arranged in precise rows across her chest. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. And there, at the top of the second row, a Navy Cross, dark ribbon with the distinctive white stripe. The medals catch the office light and throw it back in small golden echoes. She doesn't look at Mercer. She doesn't need to. The room has already rearranged itself around the medals and the uniform and the woman wearing them. The general salutes first. His hand comes up sharp, and every motion says that he is the high-ranking officer in the room, but Captain O'Brien outranks his respect. Megan returns the salute, crisp and clean. The liaison steps forward with the decorations. Each one goes into her hand separately. Bronze Star. The medal catches light like a question. Silver Star. Her jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. 2 Purple Hearts. By the second one, she closes her eyes for half a second, the only moment she allows herself. And then the Navy Cross. The liaison pins it to her uniform. The general salutes again. Megan brings her hand down. Mercer tries one more time. This is highly irregular. The hospital has policies about. Dr. Sterling, the general says, not turning around. You are going to sit in that chair and you are going to remain silent, or my liaison will have a conversation with the state medical board about your current practices. Do you understand? The name catches. Sterling. The general used his full name like a weapon. Mercer's mouth closes. His hands shake. By 4:22 p.m., the hospital administrator is on the phone with the hospital board. By 5:13 p.m., Megan's medical school mentor, a decorated army surgeon who served 3 tours in Iraq and still keeps his old camo jacket in his office, has seen the viral video and the leaked documents about Mercer's kickback scheme. 30-year-old contracts with medical supply companies. Inflated charges. Unnecessary procedures. $470,000 in overbilling to the VA over 18 months. The surgeon calls the board himself. His voice carries the weight of someone who's seen what happens when honor gets compromised. The investigation opens at 6:40 p.m. By 9:15 p.m., agents are in Mercer's office, badges and credentials and the kind of quiet competence that comes from people who have seen this pattern before. They collect computers, files, billing records. The maintenance worker's family has already filed a civil suit. The VA has opened a federal fraud investigation. Mercer's hands shake as he signs documents. He asks for a lawyer. The agents don't smile. 6 weeks later, Megan passes him on the street in Colorado Springs. She's in dress uniform, walking toward the federal courthouse where she's scheduled to testify about the supply chain manipulation and the overbilling practices she witnessed. Mercer is loading cardboard boxes into the side of a white medical supply van. His name tag reads Steve in faded plastic letters. The position doesn't require a medical degree. It doesn't require anything except the ability to load boxes and take instruction. He sees her coming and his eyes drop to the pavement. His hands stop moving. For a moment, he is just a man in the rain, loading boxes, and she is a captain in uniform walking past like he's already invisible. She doesn't slow down. She doesn't acknowledge him. But as she passes, she hears him whisper, "I'm sorry." She doesn't respond. Some words don't deserve answers. If you ever find yourself wondering whether someone you work with might be doing something wrong, overbilling, unnecessary procedures, kickback schemes, report it. The VA has a fraud hotline, 1-800-488-8244. Your hospital has a compliance officer. Your state medical board takes reports seriously. The people who speak up are the ones who save lives. They're the ones who protect the system from inside. And they're often quieter than you'd expect. Like and subscribe if you appreciate hardworking people who don't get the credit they deserve. Comment and tell us what you did for a living, or what you do now. Let's get into it.